Welcome to this video. So another question came through. I get many questions actually. And so I'll try and respond to as many as I can. But I think this is a good one because this touches on relationship dynamics at a deep level. And the question, I'm just gonna give you some background into this. The question essentially is around being in relationship and dealing with the past traumas that come up and arise in relationship. So this woman has reached out to me and she's speaking to her partner's current past wounds coming up and how to deal with them in relationship. And so that's an important question that we really have to answer, that we have to look deeply into, because when we do, we really, let me just have a look at something here. Okay, I'm back on. When we do, we give the relationship an opportunity to flourish. So I'm going to read the question out. I'm going to read it in part, and then I'm going to pause and give a response, because I think there's something that's really to be said for what this woman is trying to express and how we as a couple in that dynamic can address the situation together. Just remember, it's not, there's a combination of solo work in relationship, and there's a combination of doing the work together, being connected in that place and doing it together. That's important. So let me start. I'm going to read this out. So I'm seeing this guy and I really care about him. Something hard that keeps coming up is him bringing his past wounds and projecting them onto the relationship. So the first question I would ask is, have you got clarity on what these wounds are? Like, can he articulate these wounds? Can you articulate these wounds? That's really, really important. The next thing I would say is, what's our role? Now, we always, and this is important, this is an absolute, we always have to bring it to ourselves and take self-responsibility. Not that we're responsible for that person projecting on us. Not that we're responsible for the way they behave or react. Not that we're responsible for what they choose to say and how they act. But how are we feeding into that with our reactions, with our responses, with the subtleties of our behavior and our actions? That's really important. So what's our role and what are our wounding? What's our wounding, our pains and our fears? And how do they come into the situation? How are they affecting him? How do they amplify his wounds? And how do his wounds amplify, or the other person's wounds amplify our wounds? And how then does this dynamic and the future projection of these, or how the projection of these wounds, how do they affect the future of the relationship? So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. In previous relationships, I'll give an example of myself. In previous relationships, I had this deep-rooted fear of freedom, of losing my freedom, this fear of not having freedom. Just in life, full stop. And in relationship, that was amplified. And so my behavior in that relationship, I would push away. I would decline intimacy. I would avoid getting too close, because it really pushed on my internal edge of not feeling free, fears and pains and wounding and trauma that I hadn't dealt with. And so what that would do in my partners, generally, would trigger them to be really insecure, and it would then trigger them to generally be even more needy. And that cycle made me push back even more. And so it amplified my fear. And so we have to understand how our wounding and how our pain amplifies the others and vice versa. It's really, really important to get clear on that. Okay, let me continue with what this woman has said. So, open relationships are something he and I have talked about when we feel ready. Last night he said, I'm always being given rules, as before we were chatting about boundaries. So, interesting about the language. I'm not there, so I can't, and this man can't voice either, so he can't share his thoughts about this, right? But she said that he said, I'm always being given rules. So I'm interested about that absolute term around always. Is he really always being given rules? How do you both relate to the word boundaries? What does open relating actually mean for you? Can you define that? And what do rules mean for you? And what do rules translate for you? So helping yourself by asking really deep questions about where the pain is coming from when a man is not just a man, but when anyone is communicating to you, really unpacking what they're saying. What is the truth behind what they're saying? Let me continue with what she says. And I said, always how? So she did go ahead and ask that. Is this happening in the present? He said no, but in his past, he was given so many rules. Many of us struggle to release the past. It's a protective mechanism. And even though it's not happening in the present, we want to anticipate the pain. The brain, the ego wants to anticipate the pain. And so we revert to old compensatory and coping strategies to deal with what we think may come. So there could be a familiarity in an environment such as being in an intimate relationship, and being close with someone is familiar enough to trigger the anticipation of pain, that being associated with pain coming back into our lives. And so we begin to behave from our past selves, from our wounded child self, generally speaking. I know I did a lot of that. I would anticipate the pain, and so I would behave in a very defensive way and often attack my partner emotionally. And sometimes we use this as an excuse not to deal with our past, not to deal with our past pain, not to really confront it and be with that. So also asking, how does he and how do you relate to rules, and how you relate to rules really can define the dynamic deeply. And perhaps where are you subtly placing too many rules through your behavior and through your wounding and through your pain on the dynamic, on the relationship, out of your own fear? And that's really important as well. Let me continue now with what she has said. I explained that boundaries are what works and doesn't work for you, what is and isn't okay versus maybe what he experienced, which was a rule for domination or him trying to meet a need that he couldn't do in a way that he could be free. Great. And how can you both explore freedom? Is that something that you both value? Because if he values freedom and you don't really have a wounding or a triggering or a pain point around freedom, you're not really going to want to be there. And so that's important as well. Meeting each other's values, and to do that, you have to know each other's values. You have to have that open conversation. Conversation is so important. But conversation with clarity and wisdom and coming from heart, that's even more important. Let me continue reading. He later told me he doesn't know how to do relationships. And I said, we are learning, but it feels hard because of the continuous past wounds that keep coming up. I want to be of support and I don't want to judge. Great. I'm so glad you don't want to judge. We need to meet each other with compassion, non-judgment. The masculine particularly needs to be met with compassion, non-judgment. And when we do that, when we are met with compassion, non-judgment, we are more likely to open up and really explore our truth and express our fears in a safe environment. We feel comfortable to do so and we don't feel so pained. And so consistency is everything in relationship, whether you're in your core essence is masculine or your core essence is feminine, that's irrelevant. Safety is so important, and safety comes from consistency in behavior and how we show up to each other. And so meeting each other with compassion and judgment is crucial if we want the relationship to flourish and thrive. Very, very important. Let me continue reading. Sometimes I feel it brings me down and I feel selfish about this. Don't demote your needs. Don't ever demote your needs in relationship, and learn how to express that with clarity. Speak your truth, and speak your truth from a place that is not charged. Now, in order to do that, sometimes you need to have a tribe around you, have a group of people around you that can support you, whether it's a psychologist, a spiritual healer, a shaman, a counselor, psychiatrist, whatever it may be, that you can express to that charge and get clarity and perspective in it, so you don't bring that charged perspective into the relationship. Don't just, remember, your partner is not your therapist. And I've gone into this before. We project so much onto our partners because of our current social dynamics, and that's another story. But really, really understand this. When you express your truth, don't demote your needs. And when you express your truth, don't do it from a charged place, because it will just trigger the other person. So that was and then basically she says, thank you, inspired, etc., but thank you for your work. But I want to just end it there. And I want you to know that you're not alone in your journey. So don't suffer alone. Do not suffer alone. And do not project your pains onto your partner. That just won't help and it won't work. Power and blessings to you, beautiful people. I'll speak to you soon.